Why do you have my picture? Jack's voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit Emily like a slap across the face. He held the photograph up between two thick fingers, his dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the air feel like it had been sucked out of the room. Emily's back pressed against the wall. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, because the answer to that question was going to destroy everything both of them thought they knew. If this story already has your heart racing, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe to the channel, follow along until the very last word, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The rain had been falling over Millbrook, Ohio for 3 days straight, the kind of gray soaking rain that made the whole town feel like it was underwater. The streets smelled like wet concrete and old rust, and the few people still out walking kept their heads down, moving fast, not looking at anyone. It was the kind of weather that made Millbrook feel exactly like what it was, a town that had been slowly dying for 20 years. One factory closure at a time, one broken family at a time, one forgotten person at a time. Jack Walker didn't mind the rain. He had ridden through worse. Sleet in Wyoming, ice across a mountain pass in Colorado, a hurricane's outer edge, somewhere in the Florida panhandle that nearly pushed his Harley off the road into a ditch. Rain in Ohio in November was nothing. He had his cut on his leather jacket beneath it, and the engine under him was warm and loud and reliable in a way that most people in his life had never managed to be. He pulled his motorcycle to a stop in front of Denny Kowalski's shop just after 7 in the evening. Denny was one of the few people in Millbrook who Jack considered a genuine friend, not a club associate, not someone who needed something from him, just a man who knew how to rebuild an engine and keep his mouth shut about everything else. That combination was rarer than gold. Denny's shop was a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town, surrounded by half a dozen dead businesses and one storage facility that looked like it hadn't seen a paying customer in years. The lights were on inside. Jack could hear the sound of a tool hitting a concrete floor, and then a very specific word that Denny used every time he dropped something. Jack pushed through the side door. "You gonna get that?" he said. Denny looked up from beneath the hood of a 1987 Chevy pickup that had clearly been through at least one serious accident. He was a short man built like a fire hydrant with thick forearms and a gray beard that he'd been growing since the 90s. He pointed at the wrench on the floor. "Already got 3 more, Denny said. "Beer's in the cooler. Don't touch the Guinness." "I never touch your Guinness. You touched it last April. It was within arm's reach. That's entrapment." Denny made a sound that was almost a laugh and went back to the engine. Jack grabbed a beer that was definitely not Guinness, pulled up a stool near the workbench, and settled in. This was the part of the evening he had actually been looking forward to. No agenda, no problems to solve, no phone calls from people who needed something handled. Just Denny's shop, a cold beer, and the sound of rain on a metal roof. It lasted about 40 minutes. That was when Denny said, "Hey, the old storage unit in the back. I think the lock's busted. Wind probably got it. You mind checking it while I finish this last connection? I don't want any of my spare parts getting soaked." Jack set his beer down. "Sure." The storage room was through a back door past a narrow hallway stacked with tire rims and cardboard boxes. The door was, as Denny said, hanging open, the padlock still attached to the latch, but the latch itself pulled half away from the wooden frame, probably by the last strong gust. Jack pulled the door closed behind him and reached for the light switch on the wall. The bulb was dim, flickering once before settling into a pale yellow glow that barely reached the far corners. The room was full of things Denny had accumulated over 30 years of working on machines. Old parts, broken tools, shelving units that had collapsed under their own weight, boxes of paperwork that looked like they dated back to when Reagan was president. The rain had gotten in through a crack in the roof. At some point, there were water stains across the floor, and a corner of the room smelled like mildew and rot. Jack was just checking to make sure nothing important had gotten wet when his boot caught the edge of a collapsed shelf, and a cardboard box that had been sitting on top of it hit the floor. The contents scattered: old receipts, a broken compass, a coil of electrical wire, and a small envelope that had been sealed at some point, but whose flap had long since given up holding anything shut. He bent to pick it up. The envelope was yellowed with age. There was no address on it, no postage, nothing written on the outside at all. It had simply been sitting inside that box, inside that storage room, probably for years. The flap opened with almost no resistance, and inside was a single photograph. He pulled it out, and his entire body went still. It was him. Not a recent photograph, not a club photo, not something anyone could have taken in the last decade. This was a photograph of Jack Walker from his early 30s. The leather was younger, the beard was shorter, the lines around his eyes hadn't fully arrived yet. He was standing somewhere he didn't immediately recognize his back partially to the camera. His head turned slightly to one side like someone had called his name, and he looked up just a fraction of a second too late. I didn't know who had taken the picture. He had no memory of this moment being captured. He stood there in that dim, flickering light with the photograph in his hand, his brain doing the thing it did when something didn't compute, running it back, turning it over, looking for the angle. Because someone had this picture. Someone had put it in an envelope and hidden it inside a box inside his storage room in the back of Denny Kowalski's shop. And Jack Walker had learned a long time ago that when something showed up without explanation, there was always a reason. He flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in small, careful handwriting, the ink faded, but still legible, was a single name, Emily Carter. He read it twice, then a third time. The name meant absolutely nothing to him. He went back out to the shop with the photograph in his hand. Denny was wiping down a socket wrench when Jack came back through the door. He looked up at the expression on Jack's face and immediately put the wrench down. What happened? Jack held up the photograph. Denny stared at it. That's you. I know it's me. Where'd you find that? In your storage room, in a box. Who does that box belong to? Denny frowned. That room's got stuff from half a dozen different people who needed to store things over the years. Some of it goes back 15, 20 years. I honestly couldn't tell you which box belongs to who at this point. The name Emily Carter mean anything to you? Denny was quiet for a moment. He was thinking Jack could tell. Not stalling, actually thinking. No, not off the top of my head. He paused. Wait, Carter, there's a woman on Delmar Street. Lives in those old apartments near the textile building. Young woman, pretty rough situation from what I hear. I don't know her first name, could be. Jack looked at the photograph again. Delmar Street, he said. Denny looked at him carefully. Jack. What? It's almost 8 o'clock. It's raining. That neighborhood's not. I know what that neighborhood is. I'm just saying, maybe wait until morning. Jack folded the photograph carefully and put it inside his jacket pocket. I'll see you Thursday, Denny. The apartments on Delmar Street were a 4-story building that had been through about 30 years of deferred maintenance, 2 ownership changes, and at least 1 small fire on the 3rd floor that had left a scar of soot along the brick that nobody had ever bothered to clean. The parking lot was cracked and uneven with weeds pushing up through every gap. Half the exterior lights were out. The front buzzer panel had more tape over it than working buttons. Jack stood in front of it for a moment, rain sliding off the back of his collar, and looked at the names taped next to the apartment numbers. Some had no names at all. Some had names that had been there so long they'd blurred into illegibility. Third from the bottom in fresh handwriting that stood out against all the rest was a small strip of paper that read E. Carter 2F. He pushed the door. It wasn't locked. It opened with the kind of groan that announced to everyone in the building that someone was coming through. The hallway smelled like boiled vegetables and old carpet. The ceiling light above the staircase was buzzing faintly. Jack went up the stairs to the 2nd floor, found apartment 2F at the end of the hallway and knocked. Nothing for a long moment. Then a sound on the other side of the door. The soft, careful sound of someone moving very quietly the way a person moves when they're deciding whether to pretend they're not home. I can hear you, Jack said, not unkindly but clearly. I'm not a threat. I just need to ask you something. Another silence. Then a voice, young, tired, cautious. Who are you? My name is Jack Walker. I found something that has your name on it. The silence that followed that statement was different from the ones before it. This one had weight to it. This one had recognition in it. Go away, she said. But her voice shook on the second word in a way that told Jack the exact opposite of what the words were saying. I'm not leaving, he said, not aggressive, just honest. I have a photograph with your name written on the back of it. I want to know what it means, that's all. Another long pause. Then the sound of a deadbolt turning. Then a chain being slid back. Then the door opened about 4 inches, held by a secondary chain that was still latched, and one eye looked out at him, dark brown, young, exhausted, and unmistakably afraid. Then the eye recognized something. Jack watched it happen in real time, the moment when this woman registered his face, and everything in her expression shifted from general fear into something more specific and more complicated. "You don't know me," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, said almost to herself. "Should I?" She didn't answer that. Her eye dropped to the jacket, to the cut, to the red and white patch on his chest that nobody in the Midwest could mistake for anything other than what it was. "You're one of them," she whispered. "I'm Jack Walker," he said again. "And you have something that belongs to a part of my life I don't understand. I'd like to." The door closed. He thought for a half second that she was going to leave it at that lock. It'd walk away, wait for him to give up. And he was already deciding how patient he was going to be about this when he heard the chain slide free. The door opened. Emily Carter was 24 years old, and she looked like someone who had been carrying weight that should have been distributed across an entire family for a very long time. She was small, dark-haired, wearing a sweater that was fraying at both sleeves and jeans that had been mended at the knee. Her face was sharp-featured and intelligent, the kind of face that noticed things, that processed things quickly and filed them away. Her eyes were exhausted in the way that came not from a bad night's sleep, but from years of sleeping too lightly, always listening for the next problem. She stepped back to let him in, just barely. He stepped inside. The apartment was small and honest in the way that poor people's spaces often are, not messy, not neglected, but compressed. Every surface doing double duty. A table that was also a desk, a closet that also functioned as a pantry, a kitchen counter with a small dish rack, and beside it a pile of textbooks that looked like they came from a community college. A window that looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door, with a thin curtain over it that didn't quite reach the sill. On the wall near the window was a small shelf. On the shelf was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox with a clasp on the front. Emily saw him see it. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jack pulled the photograph from his jacket pocket and held it out toward her. "You want to tell me what this is?" She looked at the photograph. She looked at it the way someone looks at something they've seen before, something they've thought about before, something they've had complicated feelings about for a long time. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "That doesn't matter right now. What matters is your name is on the back of it." "My name." She said it quietly, like she was confirming something. "My name or my mother's handwriting." That stopped him. "What?" Emily moved to the shelf. She unclasped the wooden box and opened it with the practiced motion of someone who had done it hundreds of times. She reached inside and brought out a small stack of photographs, older than the one he was holding, bound with a rubber band that had dried and cracked but still held. She held them out to him. He took them. The photographs were old, the edges worn smooth, the colors faded the way photographs from the early 90s faded slightly, orange-tinged, slightly soft. Some showed a young woman who Jack didn't recognize standing in various places. Some showed the same woman with a small child, a girl dark-haired with the same sharp eyes that were currently watching him from across this apartment. And in the middle of the stack was another photograph of Jack. A different one, different angle, different moment, same era. Same era as the one he'd found in Denny's storage room. He looked up at Emily. "Who took these?" he said. "My mother," she said. "Her name was Laura Carter." Jack stood completely still. "She died 4 years ago," Emily continued. Her voice was steady but thin, in the way that steadiness sometimes is held carefully, because if it slipped, something else would come through. "She was sick for a long time before that. When she knew she wasn't going to get better, she gave me that box. She said it was the most important thing she owned." She paused. "She told me that if I ever found the man in those photographs, I should tell him something." "Tell me what?" Jack said. Emily looked at him directly for the first time since he'd walked through the door. Her eyes were not afraid now. They were something else entirely, something that was almost fierce. "She said to tell you that you saved her life." The words landed in the apartment like a stone dropped into still water. Jack felt the rip of it move through him. He looked at the photographs in his hand. He looked at the face of the young woman he didn't recognize. He looked at the small child with dark eyes in the background. "I don't know your mother," he said. "I know," Emily said. "That's the part that always hurt her the most." She crossed to the table and sat down. Jack, still standing, still processing, looked at the photographs again. He was trying to locate these images in the geography of his memory, his early 30s, whatever was happening in his life in that window of time. There was a lot that had happened, some of it clear, some of it buried under things he had spent deliberate effort not thinking about. "What does she say saved her life?" he asked. "Your mother." "What does she say I did?" "She said there was a night, she told me it was the worst night of her life. She was 22, maybe 23. She was in a bad situation that she'd gotten into through someone else's choices, not her own. Someone she trusted had put her in a place where she was in real danger." Emily paused. "She said a man in a motorcycle club cut through whatever was happening. She never knew if he understood exactly what he was walking into or if it was coincidence. But he created enough of a disruption that she was able to get out. Where she'd never told me the exact location. She said it was near the edge of town, some county road, old industrial area. She said she ran and didn't stop running until she got to a gas station 2 miles away." Jack was quiet. He was turning something over in his mind, something from that era of his life that he'd never fully examined. Because examining it meant also examining other things from that time, things that he'd put down and walked away from, because the weight of them had been too much. There had been a night, on a county road, in the winter, near an old industrial property that the club had done business in. He remembered the night not because of any woman he'd helped, but because of what had happened after. Because of what he'd found when he returned to the location the next day. Because of who he'd believed afterward for years had been responsible. "I need to see everything in that box," he said. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, went to the shelf and brought the box down. She set it on the table between them. Jack sat across from her for the first time. Inside the box beneath the stack of photographs were three things: a folded newspaper clipping, so old the paper had gone translucent at the creases, a letter written in the same handwriting that was on the back of the photograph, and a small key on a plain metal ring. He reached for the letter first. Emily put her hand on it before he could touch it. "She wrote that for you," Emily said. "Not for me. I've never read it." Her voice was very quiet now. "I kept it because she asked me to, in case I ever found you." He looked at her hand on the letter. He looked at her face. There was something in her expression that he hadn't expected to find in this apartment, on this street in this part of town. Not the look of someone who needed something from him, not the look of someone running a play, but something that looked exhaustingly, uncomplicatedly genuine. He lifted the letter carefully from the table. Emily let her hand fall away. He unfolded it. The handwriting was careful. The pen had been pressed a little harder than necessary into the paper, the way some people write, when the words feel important enough to require extra effort. It was dated 11 years ago. He read it slowly. The letter was short, 7 sentences, but each one hit him with the particular weight of something that had been waiting a long time to be received. She wrote that she had never forgotten what happened on that road. She wrote that she had spent years trying to find out who the man with the patch was. She wrote that she hadn't tried to contact him because she knew who he was and what world he moved in, and she had been afraid not of him, but of bringing something dangerous back toward him after everything. She wrote that she understood he probably had no memory of her at all. And then she wrote the last 2 sentences. He read them twice. He read them a third time. He set the letter face down on the table and was quiet for a long moment. Emily was watching him. "What did she say?" she asked, and then immediately, "I'm sorry, you don't have to." "She said she wanted me to know the truth," Jack said. His voice was different now, lower, slower. "She said there was something about that night that I didn't know. Something that someone made sure I never found out." Emily was absolutely still. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," Jack said slowly, "that the story I've been carrying about that night is wrong. And the question is, who made sure it stayed wrong?" He picked up the newspaper clipping. It was from a regional Ohio paper dated 25 years ago. The headline was about a theft money stolen from a business. The name of the business mentioned in the second paragraph made Jack's jaw set hard, because it wasn't just a business, it was a front, and the theft described in the clipping had been blamed on someone specific. Someone who, according to everything Jack had believed for 25 years, had destroyed something important and then run. Except the clipping had a note written in the margin in Laura Carter's handwriting. 3 words. "He did it." Jack looked up from the clipping. "Your mother knew something," he said. "She knew a lot of things," Emily said quietly. "She spent a long time trying to figure out whether telling anyone was going to get her killed." Did she ever tell anyone? Emily hesitated. She told me, she said finally. Not all of it, just enough that I understood why she kept the box, why she kept your picture. She stopped. And why, when you showed up at my door tonight, I thought, she stopped again. What? Jack said. I thought either you knew something you tracked back to me, Emily said, or someone else did. The room was quiet except for the rain on the window. Jack looked at the small key on its plain metal ring. What does this open? He said. Emily looked at the key. When she answered, something had changed in her voice. It was lower now, careful in a new way. I don't know, she said. Jack looked at her steadily. But you have a guess, he said. She looked at him for a long, measured moment. My mother said that if I ever found you, Emily said, and if you remembered anything about that night, there was one more thing she left behind. She said it was the only thing that would make the whole truth impossible to deny. She paused. She said it was in a place that only the two of you would understand. Jack said nothing, except, Emily added quietly, you didn't know her, so you don't know the place. He looked at the key. He looked at the photographs. He looked at the face of the young woman in the old photographs. Laura Carter at 22 or 23, standing somewhere in a moment she never thought anyone would record. What was your mother's life like? He said. Not the question he'd planned to ask, but the one that came out. Emily was quiet for a moment. Hard, she said. She worked hard. She loved me the best she could. She was always a little afraid of something she never fully explained. She paused. She used to say that the truth about the past is like a splinter. It doesn't kill you, but it never stops hurting until it comes out. Jack looked at the letter still face down on the table. The man she mentioned, he said carefully, the one who put her in that situation. Did she tell you his name? Emily's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Smaller, more controlled. The way people look when the answer to a question might change everything they've been living with. She told me a last name, Emily said. She said she didn't know if it would mean anything to me, but she wanted me to know it. She paused. In case. In case what? In case he came looking. The rain hit the window hard for a moment, one strong gust pushing a curtain of water against the glass. What was the name? Jack asked. Emily looked at him. Hale, she said. Victor Hale. Jack Walker did not move. He did not change expression. He was very, very good at not showing what happened inside him when something hit hard 25 years on the road, had built that skill in him like muscle memory. But something shifted behind his eyes, something that Emily Carter, sharp and perceptive, as she was, saw clearly even if she didn't know exactly what it meant. Because Victor Hale was not a stranger. Victor Hale was a name Jack Walker had not spoken aloud in 6 years, a name attached to a chapter of his life he had closed and left closed because opening it meant confronting things he decided were simply beyond knowing at this point. Except they weren't. They were sitting on the table in front of him, in a letter and a clipping and a key and a stack of photographs, left by a woman he didn't remember to a daughter she raised alone on a street where nobody looked twice, waiting for exactly this moment. He leaned back slowly. He looked at Emily Carter. She was watching him with those exhausted, intelligent eyes, and he understood with a clarity that he hadn't felt about anything in a long time exactly what she was. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't a setup. She wasn't someone with an angle or a play or a thing she was building toward. She was the last living person who carried something he'd thought was lost forever. And she'd been sitting in this apartment, in this building on this street, not knowing if the truth her mother had left her would ever reach the person it was meant for. Emily, he said. Her name felt strange in his mouth. He'd never said it before tonight, and already it felt like it carried some kind of obligation. Has anyone come to you before about any of this? She looked at him. About your mother, about the box, about Hale, anyone. Her expression answered before she did. 2 weeks ago, she said slowly. Someone left an envelope under my door, no note inside, just a photograph. She paused. Different from those. She gestured at the stack he was still holding. A photograph of me, taken from outside, from the street. Jack's eyes sharpened. Where is it? She went to the kitchen drawer and came back with a plain white envelope. Inside was a single photograph printed recently clear, in focus taken with a good lens from some distance. Emily coming out of the building, a grocery bag in one arm, keys in her other hand, looking at nothing in particular. Unaware, someone had been watching her, and someone had wanted her to know it. Why didn't you go to the police? Jack said. She gave him a look that was not unkind, but was very direct and very tired. It was the look of someone explaining something to a person who hasn't lived the life that makes the explanation necessary. Because people like me, she said simply, don't go to the police. He held the photograph of her in his hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it on the table alongside everything else. You're in danger, he said. Not a question. I know, she said, from someone who knows about that box. Probably. And you opened the door to me tonight anyway. Emily was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was very even. My mother kept your picture for 25 years, she said. She didn't keep it because she was afraid of you. She kept it because she believed until the day she died that you were someone worth believing in. She paused. I figured if she was right, if that was true, then opening the door was the right thing to do. Another pause. And if she was wrong, I wasn't going to be able to outrun you anyway. Jack looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't wrong, he said quietly. The rain kept falling, and somewhere across Millbrook, Ohio, in a house that most people had no reason to know existed, a man named Victor Hale was sitting in the dark, looking at a phone, waiting for a report that would tell him whether the last loose thread of a 25-year secret had finally been located. He was waiting to find out if the girl had talked. He had no idea who had walked through her door, but he was going to find out. And when he did that was when the real trouble was going to begin. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in his kitchen at 2 a.m. with Laura Carter's letter on the table in front of him, a cup of coffee going cold beside it, and the kind of silence around him that only arrives when a man is genuinely reckoning with something. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet house, the loud silence of a mind that can't stop moving. He had read the letter 6 times, 7 sentences. He had them memorized now, not because he'd tried to memorize them, but because that's what the mind does with things that matter. It holds them, turns them over, reads them again from a slightly different angle each time, looking for something it missed. Laura Carter had been 22 years old on the night she ran down a county road in the dark. She'd written that she never knew his name until years later when she'd seen a photograph in a regional news article about a motorcycle club charity ride. She'd recognized his face immediately, the way you recognize someone whose face you've replayed in your memory more times than you can count. She'd cut the photograph out and put it in the box. She'd asked around carefully, quietly, the way a woman with good survival instincts asks around, never directly, never in a way that might circle back to the wrong people until she had a name. Jack Walker. She'd spent years deciding whether to reach out. She'd decided against it every single time, because reaching out meant explaining how she knew him, which meant explaining that night, which meant pulling a thread that she believed correctly. It turned out was connected to something much larger and much more dangerous than one woman's narrow escape. And then she'd gotten sick, and she'd written the letter. And she'd put it in the box with the photographs and the newspaper clipping and the key, and she'd given it to a 20-year-old girl who was already too tired for her age and told her, if you ever find this man, give him this. Jack picked up the newspaper clipping again. He did it. 3 words in the margin in Laura's handwriting. But they were 3 words aimed at a specific target, at a specific crime, at a specific moment that Jack had spent 25 years understanding in exactly the wrong way. Here was what Jack had believed for 2.5 decades, that on a winter night 25 years ago, a man named Danny Reyes, who had been part of the club's extended network, not a full member, but someone trusted enough to be inside certain conversations, had stolen $60,000 from a business account the club was using and then had disappeared. Danny Reyes had been young, maybe 25, and Jack had liked him, which was the part that had always made it worse. You trust someone, you extend yourself toward them. You believe in them, and then they take everything you handed them and walk. Jack had never found Danny Reyes, not in 25 years. He'd stopped actively looking after the first 3 or 4 years because looking and not finding does something to a person. It becomes its own kind of obsession, and Jack had enough things that wanted to consume him without feeding that one. He'd put it down, filed it under things that happened, things that didn't get resolved, things you carry but don't unpack. Victor Hale had been the one to tell him about Danny Reyes. Victor Hale had been the one who produced the evidence, the records, the timeline, the narrative that put Danny Reyes at the center of everything and explained every gap in the story. And now Laura Carter, from beyond death, from inside a wooden box in a broken-down apartment on Delmar Street, was telling him with 3 words written in faded ink in a newspaper margin that Hale did it. Jack sat with that, and sat with the specific nauseating quality of discovering that a story you've believed for 25 years was built by the same man who benefited most from you believing it. At 3 in the morning, he picked up his phone and called a number. He hadn't called in a while. It rang 4 times before a voice rough with sleep answered. "This better be an emergency," said the voice. "It is," Jack said. "I need to talk to you about Victor Hale." A pause, long enough that Jack could hear the sound of someone sitting up in bed coming awake. Jack, the voice belonged to Marcus Webb, who'd been in the club longer than almost anyone and who had a memory for history that bordered on the encyclopedic. "Victor Hale hasn't been in our world for 6 years. I know, but I know. What happened?" "Something came up. I can't explain it over the phone." Jack paused. "What do you actually know about him from before, from the beginning?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How far back are you going?" 25 years. The silence on the other end of the line had a particular quality to it. Not the silence of someone who didn't know anything. The silence of someone deciding how much of what they knew they wanted to say. "Come by in the morning," Marcus said, "early, before anyone else is around." Jack looked at the clock. "It's already morning," he said. "Then come by at a decent hour," Marcus said, and ended the call. Jack folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. He put everything back in the wooden box, and he put the box on the kitchen counter where he could see it. Then he went and sat in his chair by the window and watched the street and didn't sleep. "I was thinking about a 22-year-old woman running down a county road in the dark." He was thinking about what she must have been running from and what she must have been running toward and how she had spent the rest of her life carrying something that was never truly hers to carry. And he was thinking about her daughter, 24 years old, alone, in a 2-room apartment with fraying sleeves and a pile of textbooks in a box of secrets, who had opened the door to a Hell's Angel in the rain because her mother had told her to trust the man in the photograph. That woman deserved better than what had been handed to her. Both of them did. He was at Marcus Webb's house at 7:15 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place on Route 9 that opened at 6:30. Marcus answered the door already dressed, which meant he hadn't gone back to sleep either. He took the coffee, looked at Jack's face, and said nothing for a moment. They went inside. Marcus Webb was 61 years old, built lean and angular, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that were permanently stained around the knuckles from 40 years of working on engines. He had a way of listening that was different from most people, fully present, not interrupting, not rushing to the next thing. He waited until you were completely finished before he said a single word in response. Jack had always respected that about him. Jack laid everything out. He put the box on Marcus's kitchen table and went through it piece by piece: the photograph, the letter, the newspaper clipping, the key, the photograph of Emily taken from the street. He talked for about 20 minutes without stopping. He explained every conversation with Emily, every detail. He remembered every piece of the picture as he currently understood it. When he finished, Marcus was looking at the newspaper clipping. He was looking at the 3 words in the margin. His expression had done something complicated while Jack was talking, a long, slow shift from attentive to troubled to something that sat on the outer edge of genuinely unsettled. "You know what your problem is," Marcus said finally, not a question. "Tell me, you were never suspicious of Hale because you never had reason to be." He showed up with evidence. He had the whole story ready, and you were already angry. You'd already decided someone had done something wrong. He just pointed you at Danny Reyes instead of himself. "I know that now." "Danny Reyes," Marcus said slowly. He set the clipping down. "You know, I thought about Danny Reyes more than once over the years. Because the thing about Danny was he wasn't the type. I know that sounds like something everybody says after the fact, but I mean it specifically. Danny Reyes was scared of his own shadow when it came to money. His whole thing was that he'd grown up with nothing and he'd made something small and honest out of himself, and he wasn't going to risk it. That's what never sat right with me about the story. You never said anything. You were furious for years, and Hale had documentation." Marcus looked at him. When someone has documentation, it's very hard to argue with it based on a feeling about a man's character. "Where's Danny Reyes now?" Jack asked. Marcus looked at him for a long time. "What?" Jack said. "Danny Reyes died 15 years ago, Marcus said quietly. "Car accident out in New Mexico. I heard about it through someone who'd known him out there. He'd been living under the radar for years. Never came back. Never tried to contact anyone." Jack was quiet. Because he thought we'd kill him, Jack said. Probably, Marcus said. The weight of that settled in the room between them. A man who had run from a crime he hadn't committed. A man who had spent 15 years in New Mexico living small and invisible because he believed that coming back meant dying, and then a car accident somewhere in the desert, and that was the end of Danny Reyes. Jack picked up the small key from the table. This belongs to something, he said. Laura Carter left it with everything else. Emily says she doesn't know what it opens. Describe it. Jack held it up. It was a small brass key, the kind used for a lockbox or a storage unit or a safe deposit box, not a door key, not a padlock key. It had a number stamped into the side, 114. Marcus looked at it without touching it. Safe deposit box, he said immediately. I've seen enough of those to know, which means she had something in a bank box somewhere that she wanted you to find. He paused. Question is which bank, and whether the box is still active if she's been dead 4 years. Emily would be the account holder now, Jack said, if her mother set it up right. If, Marcus said. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then Marcus, Victor Hale, where is he now? Marcus leaned back. Last I heard, Marcus said carefully, he's still in the region, moved out of Millbrook proper, but he's not far, running some kind of private security operation now. Consulting, very clean, very legitimate looking on the surface. He paused. He's been building something for the last few years. I don't know exactly what. But I've heard his name connected to some development projects in the county, land purchases, rezoning, the kind of thing that requires knowing the right people. The kind of thing that requires making sure certain old stories stay buried, Jack said. Yes, Marcus said, exactly that kind of thing. Jack stood up. He picked up the box. He looked at Marcus. I'm going to need to talk to some people, he said. I figured, Marcus said. Jack, he paused. Be careful with this. Hale isn't some street-level problem. If he's been operating cleanly for 6 years and he's connected to money and development, then he's got people around him. People who keep things quiet for a living. I know. And if he knows about the girl, he already does, Jack said. Someone sent her a photograph of herself 2 weeks ago. Someone's been watching her. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Then you're already behind. I know that too, Jack said. He picked up the box. That's why I'm not going home first. He drove directly from Marcus's house back to Delmar Street. It was just past 8 in the morning. The building looked different in daylight, no less run down, but the particular menace that bad neighborhoods carry at night was replaced by something more mundane and more honest. People going to work. A kid on a bicycle. An old man standing on the front step drinking coffee and watching the street with the calm expression of someone who had seen everything that street had to offer and found it neither surprising nor alarming. Jack went up to 2F and knocked. Emily answered faster this time. She was dressed different sweater, same tired eyes, a cup of something hot in her hand. She looked at him standing there with the ball, and then she looked past him at the hallway and then back at him. You came back, she said. I told you I wasn't a threat. People say a lot of things, she said, but she stepped back and let him in. He put the box on the table. He told her what Marcus had told him about Danny Reyes. He watched her face as he talked. She was good at controlling her expression, this young woman, but there were things that got through anyway. Anger, sadness, the particular expression that crosses a person's face when they're hearing confirmation of something they already half believed. So the man my mother blamed, Emily said slowly. Hale, he framed someone else for what he did. That's what I believe. And the man he framed spent 15 years hiding and then died. Yes, Emily was quiet for a moment. My mother knew that. She knew what really happened. And she spent all those years not saying anything because she was afraid. She was right to be afraid, Jack said. Not gently, not harshly, just honestly. Hale was connected. He had resources. She was a 22-year-old woman who ran from a situation she barely survived. Coming forward would have put a target on her. So she stayed quiet. She stayed quiet and kept the evidence and waited for a moment that never came. He paused. Until she got sick and decided she was going to put it in your hands instead. Emily set her cup down. Hands were steady, but only barely. What evidence, she said. The newspaper clipping. That's just a note in a margin. That's not proof of anything. No, Jack said. He picked up the key. This is. She looked at the key. My mother said she didn't know what that opened, Emily said. Your mother said a lot of things carefully to make sure nobody who was listening would understand the full picture, Jack said. The clipping, the letter, the key, they go together. The clipping tells me what happened. The letter tells me who's responsible. And the key opens whatever she left behind to prove it. Emily stared at the key. A safe deposit box, she said quietly, almost to herself, like she'd had that thought before and put it aside. Number 114, does that number mean anything to you? Any bank your mother used? She was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes had gone somewhere internal. Somewhere she was sorting through old information. She had an account at Millbrook Federal, Emily said slowly. I know, because when she died, I had to deal with closing it out. There wasn't much in it, but she was very specific that it stay at that bank and not transfer even when things got bad. She paused. I thought it was just, I don't know, stubbornness, habit. She'd had that account for years. Jack was already on his feet. Millbrook Federal opens at 9, he said. Emily looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and something that might have been the very early stages of hope. You think it's there, she said. I think your mother was very smart, Jack said, and I think she planned this for longer than either of us realizes. Emily stood up. She grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door. She paused with it half on and looked at him. What's going to be in it? She asked. I don't know, he said honestly. But whatever it is, it scared Hale enough to put someone outside your building with a camera. Emily finished pulling on her jacket. Okay, she said quietly. Let's go. Millbrook Federal Savings was a small bank in the kind of building that had been built in the 1960s to project permanence and respectability and had since settled into a kind of faded steadiness. There were 4 teller windows, 2 of which were staffed on a Tuesday morning, and a service desk near the back where a woman in her 50s looked up when they walked in. Emily approached her. Jack stayed half a step behind, not out of the conversation, but aware that 2 people walking into a bank together read differently, depending on which one does the talking, and that Emily Carter talking to a bank employee looked entirely different from Jack Walker talking to a bank employee. I need to check on a safe deposit box, Emily said. It was under my mother's name, Laura Carter. She passed away 4 years ago. The woman behind the desk, her nameplate said, Patricia asked for identification and the account number. Emily provided both. Patricia typed something, looked at her screen, typed something else, and then looked up with a slightly different expression. There is a safe deposit box under that account, she said. Box 114. The account was structured as a joint account with your name as the secondary holder. She paused. Your mother added you to the account just before her passing. Did you know about that? Emily's voice was very steady. I knew about the account. I wasn't sure about the box. Do you have the key? Emily looked at Jack. Jack placed the small brass key on the counter. Patricia looked at the key. She picked it up, examined the number stamped into the side, and set it back down. I'll need to verify your ID against our records and have you sign the access form. Then I can take you back. It took 12 minutes to complete the paperwork. Jack stood near the wall and watched the door while Emily signed everything that needed signing. His phone was in his hand. He'd sent a text to Marcus when they left Delmar Street, and Marcus had confirmed it with a single word, acknowledge, which was Marcus's way of saying he was aware of the situation and would be paying attention. Patricia led them through a door and down a short hallway to the vault room. She inserted her bank key into one side of the box. Emily inserted the brass key into the other, and the small door swung open. Patricia removed the metal box inside, placed it on the table in the center of the room, and left them alone. Emily stood on one side of the table. Jack stood on the other. She lifted the lid. Inside the box were 3 items: a flash drive in a small plastic sleeve, a handwritten ledger, the real kind, spiral-bound, the pages dense with columns of numbers, and a sealed envelope. Emily looked at the flash drive. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the envelope with her name written on it in her mother's handwriting. Her hands were not steady anymore. She picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment without opening it. Then she carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single page, different from the letter she'd given Jack. Shorter, direct. She read it. Her expression moved through several things in the space of 30 seconds. Recognition, grief, anger, and finally a particular kind of grief that was also relief, the grief of finally understanding something that has been unclear for a very long time. She writes that the ledger records every transaction Victor Hale ran through the business account over a 4-year period, Emily said. Her voice was controlled, but only by effort. She writes that she kept the records because Hale trusted her to process some of the paperwork and never thought she understood what she was looking at. She paused. She was 20 years old when she started keeping copies. She did it for 4 years without him knowing. She worked for him, Jack said. She worked for the business. She didn't know it was connected to your club until the night everything went wrong. Emily looked up at him. She was an office assistant. She was 20 years old and trying to pay rent. She had no idea what she'd walked into. Jack looked at the ledger. 25 years of answers in a spiral-bound book sitting in a metal box in a small bank vault waiting. The flash drive, he said. She says it contains scanned copies of the original documents. Everything backed up in case the physical records were lost. Emily set the letter down carefully. She says she made 3 copies, one on the drive, one that she gave to someone for safekeeping that she doesn't identify, and one that she destroyed when she got sick because she was afraid of it being found. The unidentified copy, Jack said. Emily nodded. She doesn't say who has it. She says only that if anything happened to her, the person would know what to do. Jack's mind was already moving through the implications. Hale had sent someone to photograph Emily, which meant Hale knew or suspected that Laura Carter had left something behind, which meant either Hale had suspected it for years or something recent had triggered the search. Something recent. Did anything happen recently, Jack said. In the last month or two, anything unusual, anyone asking questions, anyone showing up who shouldn't have. Emily frowned. She was thinking. There was a man, she said slowly. About 6 weeks ago, he came to the building saying he was from a property management company, said the building was being evaluated for potential purchase and wanted to know how long residents had been there, whether they were on month-to-month leases or longer terms. She paused. I thought it was just real estate stuff. The building's been struggling. I figured someone was looking at buying it. What did he look like? Jack said. She described the man. Professionally dressed, mid-40s, very calm, very practiced, asked his questions and left without anything feeling overtly wrong. He was looking for you specifically, Jack said, not the building. Emily stared at him. They already knew your name, Jack said. They knew your mother was Laura Carter. They've been trying to figure out what she left behind. The property visit was reconnaissance. He paused. The photograph under the door came 3 weeks later. They were escalating, Emily said. The understanding was landing on her in pieces, each piece heavier than the last. They were trying to scare you into moving, Jack said. If you move, you take everything with you. Then they know where to look. Emily sat down heavily on the small chair near the table. She was quiet for a moment. When she looked up at him, the exhaustion in her eyes was different. It wasn't the exhaustion of poverty or overwork anymore. It was the exhaustion of someone who has just realized how long they have been in danger without knowing it. My mother protected me by not telling me, she said quietly, and that worked until it didn't. It worked long enough, Jack said. She kept you safe until she could put this in your hands. And then I found a photograph in a broken storage room. Jack looked at her. Or someone put it there to make sure I found it. Emily went very still. The 3rd copy, she said, the one she gave to someone for safekeeping. Someone who knew where that box was, Jack said. Someone who knew that if I found a photograph with your name on it, I would come looking. He paused. Someone who knew me well enough to know I wouldn't let it go. Who? Emily said. Jack was already thinking of a name. Not Marcus. Marcus didn't know. Someone older. Someone who had known Jack for long enough to understand how his mind worked, how he moved toward a question when it landed in front of him. Someone who had known Laura Carter too, maybe who had been in Millbrook long enough to know both stories. Someone who had a storage room full of things from a dozen different people over a dozen different years. Jack looked up at Emily. Stay here, he said. Don't open that door for anyone except me. Where are you going? To talk to Denny Kowalski, he said. And before Emily could respond, he was already through the vault room door. He drove to Denny's shop the way he drove when something was urgent, not reckless, but deliberate, every decision economic. He was there in 11 minutes. Denny was in the shop. Of course he was. Denny was always in the shop. He looked up when Jack came through the door, and something moved through his expression that Jack had missed last night. Something that had been there, he now realized, and he hadn't read it correctly because he hadn't known what he was looking at. The box, Jack said. Not a greeting, not a preamble. The box in your storage room. You knew it was there. Denny set his wrench down. Jack, you know what was in it. Denny was quiet for a long moment. He took his cap off and set it on the workbench, and he rubbed the back of his neck, and he looked at Jack with an expression that was entirely genuine and entirely guilty. How long? Jack said. 11 years, Denny said. She came to me 11 years ago, Laura Carter. I didn't know her well. We had some mutual people. You know how it is in this town. Everyone's 2 people away from everyone else. She said she needed somewhere to put something safe, somewhere nobody would look. He paused. She said the day she couldn't come back for it herself, someone would come looking. And she gave me 2 descriptions of who it might be. Her daughter, Jack said. And you, Denny said. Jack stared at him. She knew me. She knew of you, Denny said. She'd spent a long time knowing of you. She knew your name. She knew your reputation. She knew what mattered to you. She knew that if a photograph with the right name on it ended up in your hands, you'd find the girl. He paused. She also knew she couldn't count on timing. She didn't know when she'd die or whether Emily would find you first or you'd find Emily. So she set it up so it could work either way. She engineered this, Jack said. She planned it, Denny said. There's a difference. She wasn't manipulating anyone. She understood how people work. She understood how you work. He looked at Jack steadily. She said you were the only person she'd ever met in passing for 30 seconds who made her feel like someone was paying attention to whether she lived or died. The shop was very quiet. I sent her daughter a photograph 2 weeks ago, Denny said quietly. Not the surveillance one that wasn't me, but I sent her one of the old ones, through the mail from the box, to wake things up because I'd heard Hale's name connected to that building she lives in, and I knew time was running short. He paused. I put the other photograph in the storage room 2 days before I called you about the busted lock. He held Jack's gaze steadily. I'm sorry I wasn't straight with you from the start. Jack was quiet for a long, long moment. Then, is there anything else she told you? Anything she said that I need to know? Denny hesitated. She said Hale has a partner, he said. Someone local, someone still here, someone who has been keeping an eye on things for years, he paused. She didn't know the name, but she said this person that was close enough to know if the truth ever started moving. Jack looked at him. Which means if we're moving, Jack said slowly, they already know. Denny nodded, and somewhere in Millbrook, Ohio, that was exactly what was happening. Jack drove back to Millbrook Federal with one hand on the wheel and his phone in the other thumb, moving across the screen before he'd even fully processed what Denny had told him. He sent Marcus a message in 4 words, Hale has someone inside. Then he put the phone on the seat and focused on driving because the kind of thinking he needed to do right now required his hands to be doing something automatic while his brain did the real work. Hale had a partner, someone local, someone who had been watching things for years close enough to know if the truth started moving. That was the detail that changed the shape of everything. Because it meant the photograph under Emily's door 2 weeks ago wasn't just a warning, it was a signal. Someone in Millbrook had seen something, maybe Emily asking questions, maybe a name surfacing somewhere, maybe something as small and ordinary as the wrong person noticing the wooden box on the shelf through the apartment window and had passed that information to Hale, and Hale had moved. The question wasn't whether Hale knew things were in motion now. He almost certainly did. The question was how much he knew and how fast he was going to respond to it. Jack pulled into the bank parking lot and was through the door before the engine had stopped ticking. Patricia at the desk looked up with the expression of someone who had expected him to be gone longer. He went through the door without stopping to explain down the hallway and knocked twice on the vault room door. It's me, he said. A pause. Then the sound of a chair moving and the door opened. Emily had not been idle. The ledger was open on the table in front of her, and she had been going through it page by page. She looked up when Jack came in with an expression that was focused and sharp in a way that told him she was running on adrenaline, and the particular clarity that comes when fear gets channeled into something useful. There are 4 years of records in here, she said immediately. My mother wasn't just keeping track of the transactions. She was cross-referencing them. She marked certain entries with a small symbol in the margin, a circle with a line through it. Those entries, when you add them up, she stopped. Jack, we're talking about over $400,000, moved through the account in pieces over 4 years. Small enough that no single entry would raise a flag, but consistent enough that if you look at the whole picture, It's a pattern, Jack said. It's a confession, Emily said. Documented by someone who understood exactly what she was looking at and was careful enough to copy it by hand so there would be no digital trail back to her. She looked at him. My mother was 20 years old when she started doing this. 20 years old. Jack sat down across from her. We have to move fast, he said. Hale has someone in Millbrook feeding him information. They know things are in motion. We can't sit here. Emily closed the ledger. What do we do with this? We don't take it to the police, Jack said. Not yet. Not until we know who Hale's local contact is, because if it's anyone with access to local law enforcement, then we hand it straight to him, Emily said. She said it flatly without drama because she already understood. That was the thing about Emily Carter. She didn't need things explained twice. She absorbed information and integrated it and moved forward. Exactly, Jack said. Right now, this ledger and that drive are the only leverage we have. We need to understand the full picture before we hand it to anyone. He picked up the flash drive and put it in his jacket pocket. He closed the ledger and put it back in the metal box. He looked at Emily. Do you trust me? He said. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. My mother did, she said. That's not what I asked. Another second. Yes, she said. Then we're going to your apartment to get anything you can't replace, and then you're not going back in there. Not tonight. Emily opened her mouth, closed it, and then nodded. They were back at Delmar Street in 8 minutes. Emily moved through the apartment fast and efficient, a practiced efficiency that told Jack she'd had to pack quickly before for reasons she'd never had to explain to anyone. She took the wooden box, a backpack, with what looked like a semester's worth of textbooks and a change of clothes and a small photograph from the windowsill that she tucked into the front pocket of the backpack without explanation. Jack was watching the street from the window while she packed. Nothing obviously wrong. Cars he didn't recognize parked on the block, but that meant almost nothing. Then his phone buzzed. Marcus. He picked up immediately. Talk to me, Jack said. I've been making calls, Marcus said. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was delivering information he'd verified. Victor Hale's private security operation. It's not just consulting. He's got a contract with the development group that's been buying up property in the south end of Millbrook. The same development group that has a letter of intent on the building Emily Carter lives in. Jack was quiet for 1 full second. He's been trying to buy her building, Jack said. He's been trying to get control of that entire block, Marcus said. Has been for 18 months. Every tenant who's moved out, and there have been several, the apartment went off market immediately. New locks, no new tenants. He's been clearing the building out 1 unit at a time. A pause. Emily Carter is one of 4 remaining tenants. She's also the only one who hasn't received a buyout offer. Because he doesn't want to pay her to leave, Jack said. He wants to know what she has first. That's how I read it, Marcus said. Jack, he owns the property management company that showed up 6 weeks ago to evaluate the building. Jack turned from the window. The man who came to ask questions, he said. His name is Ray Cortland. He's been with Hale for at least 8 years. Very clean record, very professional face on everything. He's the operational layer between Hale and anything that might get messy. Is Cortland in Millbrook? He hasn't left, Marcus said. My information puts him at a property on the east side. He has a base of operations there. A pause. And Jack, one more thing. The development project Hale is connected to the zoning variance they need to move forward with the South End acquisition. The public hearing on that variance is in 9 days. Jack understood exactly what that meant without needing it explained. 9 days before Hale either got what he needed and moved forward or the whole project stalled. 9 days in which whatever Laura Carter had left behind in that safe deposit box was the most dangerous thing in Millbrook, Ohio. Marcus, he said, I need the club. A brief pause. I know, Marcus said. Already working on it. Jack hung up as Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway with the backpack on her shoulder and the wooden box under her arm. Ready? She said. He looked at her, and for a fraction of a second he thought about what it would feel like to be 24 years old and carrying a dead woman's secrets in a backpack full of textbooks out of the only home you had with a Hell's Angel you met 12 hours ago. He thought about what that required in terms of sheer nerve. Then he moved toward the door. Let's go, he said. I took her to a house on the west side of Millbrook that belonged to a man named Carl Briggs, a longtime club associate, not a member but someone with a house that had 3 exits and a reputation in the neighborhood that kept trouble off the front step. Carl was 48, built like a retired offensive lineman, and had the personality of someone who had made peace with the world and everything in it, which made him surprisingly good company in a tense situation. He opened the door, looked at Jack, looked at Emily, looked at the backpack and the wooden box and said, "Kitchen table's cleared. Coffee's on." Emily sat at Carl's kitchen table with the ledger open again while Jack made calls. She had a yellow legal pad that Carl produced from a kitchen drawer, and she was working through the margin-marked entries, systematically writing down figures. Her handwriting was small and precise. She worked with the focused concentration of someone who was using the task to keep the fear from taking up too much room. Jack watched her for a moment between calls. "You're an accounting student," he said. She didn't look up. Had to stop last year when I couldn't make the payments." A beat. "I was 2 semesters from finishing." He didn't say anything to that, but he noted it. His second call was to a man named Pete Dolan, who had been with the club for 30 years and currently ran a construction operation that did legitimate work, but also knew every building in the county, who owned what the histories were, where the bodies were buried metaphorically and occasionally literally. Pete knew things about Millbrook's property landscape that the county recorder's office wouldn't tell you in a straight answer. "Victor Hale's development project," Jack said when Pete picked up. "Tell me what you know." Pete took a breath. "South End acquisition. They were calling it the Millbrook Commons Project, publicly mixed use, some residential, some retail. Very clean pitch to the city council, economic revitalization jobs, all that. But the actual footprint they're trying to assemble is bigger than what they've shown publicly." A pause. "The rezoning application that's going to the hearing in 9 days, it includes a parcel that I know for a fact was acquired through a shell company 18 months ago. That shell company, if you trace it back far enough, connects to the same holding group Hale works for. Meaning he's acquiring land through one company and applying for zoning through another company, and the council doesn't know they're connected." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Pete said. "And there's a third layer. The financial backer for the whole project. The money behind the money is an investment group out of Columbus that has done this in 4 other towns in Ohio in the last 6 years. Same playbook every time. Assemble a block, push the zoning through, build the commercial anchor, sell the development rights for 3 times what they paid. It's a machine." A pause. "And if someone could prove that the initial land acquisition was funded through money that was stolen 25 years ago, the whole project collapses," Jack said. "The whole project collapses," Pete confirmed, "and everyone who's been laundering money through it for 25 years gets exposed." Jack ended the call and stood for a moment with his hand on the phone. That was the complete picture. That was why the ledger mattered. Not just as evidence of a historical crime, but as a thread that pulled at the right moment, unraveled something that was still actively running, still producing money, still connected to real decisions being made in the present. Hale hadn't just buried the past, he'd been building on top of it year after year after year. And that foundation was now supporting a multi-million-dollar development project that was 9 days from the point of no return. I went back to the kitchen table. "Emily," and he said, "your mother's ledger, does she track what happened to the stolen money, where it went after?" Emily didn't hesitate. She flipped to the back section of the ledger where the pages had a different color marking on the corners. "She has a separate section here. She called it forward movement. It tracks 4 transfers over a period of 2 years after the initial theft. The money moved in stages, smaller amounts into different accounts. And the last entry before the record stop shows it landing in something she labels only as HV Investment Group." Jack stared at her. "HV," he said. "Hale Victor," Emily said quietly. "Or the other way around. Either way." "That's the seed money," Jack said. "That's where his whole operation started. He stole $60,000 from the club, framed Danny Reyes, and used that money as the foundation for everything he's built since." He paused. "And now that foundation is underneath a development project that's about to go before the city council." Emily closed the ledger carefully. "My mother knew all of this," she said. "She knew enough," Jack said. "She knew what she saw. She may not have known exactly where it led, but she knew the ledger was dangerous. She knew it was the kind of thing that didn't expire." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Jack hadn't expected. "I want to be in the room when this ends," she said. Her voice was very level. "Whatever you're planning, whatever happens next, I want to be there." Jack looked at her. "That's not..." She was my mother, Emily said. She spent 25 years carrying this. She died carrying it. Whatever she left behind, she left it to me. Not to you, not to your club, to me. A pause and her voice didn't waver at all. I want to be in the room. Jack held her gaze for a long moment. We'll see, he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and Emily Carter was apparently experienced enough with difficult men to recognize the distinction. The first sign that things were accelerating came at 2 in the afternoon. Marcus called. Ray Corton was at Emily's building this morning, he said, about 45 minutes after you left. My source saw him go up to the second floor and come back out 12 minutes later. He made a phone call from the parking lot and drove east. Toward Hale, Jack said. I'd assume so, Marcus said. They know she's gone. They know she took things with her. Jack was already on his feet. Any movement toward Carl's place? Not that I can see, but Jack Cortland knows Millbrook. If he's good at his job, he's going to work through the connection points. Who does she know? Where might she go? He's going to be working that problem right now. She doesn't know anyone, Jack said. That's the part Hale didn't account for. She's been alone here. No family, no close friends, no network. He paused. Which means the only thread to pull is me. And if they pull that thread, they get the club, Jack said, which is fine. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then you want them to come to us. I want to control where this conversation happens, Jack said. Right now, Hale is reactive. He's trying to figure out where things went and who has what. That's a position of disadvantage. I want to keep him there. And the evidence. Secure. I need a lawyer, Marcus. A good one. Someone who doesn't know anyone in the county, someone from outside. I need them to look at that ledger and that drive and tell me exactly what we have before I decide the next move. I know someone in Columbus, Marcus said. Karen Feld. She's done work for the club before strictly above board, and she's got a reputation that makes prosecutors nervous. I'll call her. Do it now, Jack said, and Marcus tell her it's urgent. The lawyer arrived at Carl's house at 6 in the evening. Karen Feld was 53 years old, small and precise, in the way that very effective people sometimes are. She didn't waste movement or words, and she had the particular alert quality of someone who processes information very quickly and very quietly. She carried a briefcase, shook Jack's hand, looked at Emily with a direct and respectful nod, sat down at the table and said, "Show me what you have." She spent 40 minutes with the ledger and the flash drive. She'd brought a laptop and transferred the drive contents while she worked through the physical records. She asked Emily 4 questions during that time, all specific, all showing she already understood the architecture of what she was looking at. Emily answered all 4 clearly and without hesitation. When she was finished, she closed the laptop and folded her hands on the table. "This is real," she said. "The ledger is detailed enough to establish a clear pattern, and the digital records corroborate it. Taken together, you're looking at documentation of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering, spanning approximately 4 years. The downstream implications, the connection to the current development project that would require additional forensic accounting to fully establish, but based on what's in these records, there's more than enough probable cause to trigger an investigation that would likely uncover it." "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" Jack said. "To file formally," Karen considered, "a week minimum to prepare the materials properly and identify the correct jurisdiction given the scope of the financial crimes. State level is likely the right entry point given the real estate element." She paused. However, Jack said, "the 9-day window you mentioned complicates things. If the zoning hearing proceeds before any investigation is initiated, Hale gets his variance. Even if charges come later, the development project itself may be insulated from the criminal findings depending on how the corporate structures are set up." She looked at Jack directly. "If you want to stop the project and expose Hale, those 2 things need to happen simultaneously or very close together. Stopping the hearing requires getting this information to the right people on the city council before the vote. Starting the investigation requires filing with the state attorney general's office. Both need to happen in roughly the same window. Meaning we have maybe 4 or 5 days to get everything in place," Jack said. "Realistically, yes," Karen said. Emily was looking at the ledger. Something in her face had shifted, not fear, something more complicated than fear. The weight of it, maybe. The weight of 25 years coming down to a 4-day window. "Can you help us do both?" Emily asked Karen directly. Karen looked at Emily for a moment. "Yes," she said simply. "That's why I'm here." The second sign that things were accelerating came at 8:15 that evening. Carl's phone, the landline, which almost nobody had the number for, rang once and stopped, then rang twice, then rang 3 times and stopped. Carl, who had been sitting in the living room reading a newspaper with the impressive calm of a man in no apparent hurry, stood up and went to the window. "Someone's coming," he said, not alarmed, just factual. Jack was already at the window. A single car moving slowly down the block. It stopped 2 houses short of Carl's, and nothing happened for a moment. Then it moved forward again and parked across the street. No one got out. "Cortland?" Jack asked. "Wrong car for Cortland," Carl said. "This is someone else." Jack's phone buzzed. "Marcus." He picked up. "I just got a call from someone you need to hear from," Marcus said. "He's outside Carl's house right now. He drove 3 hours to be there." A pause. "Don't shoot him." "Who is it?" "His name is Thomas Reyes," Marcus said. "He's Danny's younger brother." The air in the room changed. Jack looked at Carl. Carl looked at Jack. Emily from the kitchen doorway had gone very still. "Send him in," Jack said. Thomas Reyes was 43 years old, lean and weathered, with Danny's eyes and a face that had spent significant time outdoors and in difficult circumstances. He walked into Carl's living room with his hands visible and his posture carrying the specific tension of someone who has rehearsed how they were going to handle this moment and is now discovering that the rehearsal was insufficient preparation for the reality. He looked at Jack. "You're Walker," he said. "I am," Jack said. "My brother didn't steal from you," Thomas said. Straight out, no preamble. The words had been waiting a long time to be said to this specific person in this specific room. "I know," Jack said. Thomas stopped. Whatever he'd expected, denial, skepticism, the need to argue, to produce evidence, to fight for it, he had not expected that. His whole body shifted slightly, the tension reconfiguring into something less braced and more lost. "You know," he said. "I found out today," Jack said. "Sit down." Thomas sat. Jack told him what they had found. The ledger, the letter, the money trail, the name Victor Hale at the center of it. He watched Thomas's face as the story landed piece by piece, and what he saw in that face was not the vindication a person might expect. What he saw was something much more painful, the specific grief of someone who is hearing too late the truth that would have changed everything. Too late for Danny, too late for the 15 years he spent in hiding in New Mexico. Too late for the car accident on a desert road that ended a life that should never have been driven to hiding in the first place. "He ran because of me," Jack said quietly. Thomas looked at him. His jaw was set hard. "He ran because someone made sure you'd believe the wrong thing," Thomas said. "That's not the same." "It's close enough," Jack said. A long silence. "Why are you here?" Jack asked. "How did you even know?" "Marcus Webb," Thomas said. "Danny and I stayed in touch with Marcus over the years." Careful and direct, Danny didn't trust much by the end, but he trusted Marcus. "When Danny died, Marcus reached out to me. He's been keeping me informed when things moved." He paused. "Marcus called me this morning and said it was time." Jack thought about Marcus, who had known Danny Reyes for decades, who had never quite believed the story but had never been able to disprove it either, who had kept a quiet thread of contact running through 15 years and a man's death, who had sent Thomas Reyes to Carl's house tonight. Marcus had been carrying this too. "What do you want?" Jack asked Thomas. Thomas looked at the ledger on the table. He looked at Emily, who was still in the kitchen doorway watching with those sharp, steady eyes. "Danny spent 15 years believing you'd kill him if you found him," Thomas said. "He spent 15 years being afraid. He died afraid." He paused. "I want the man who did that to him to be held responsible for it. Not street justice, real justice. The kind that goes on a record somewhere and can't be buried. That's what we're building," Jack said. "Then I want to help," Thomas said. "What do you have?" Thomas reached into his jacket and produced a small notebook. Old, the cover worn and soft, he set it on the table. "Danny kept records too," he said. "Not like this," he gestured at the ledger, "but his own account, what he remembered about that night, about the things he was told about Hale. He wrote it down after he got to New Mexico because he said he needed to put it somewhere outside his own head." He paused. "He mailed it to me 6 months before he died and said to keep it safe." Jack looked at the notebook. "Does it name Hale directly?" he asked. "By description," Thomas said. "Danny didn't know his name at the time, but the description is specific, and it matches. Karen Feld, who had been listening from the far end of the table with complete stillness, leaned forward. "May I?" she said, gesturing at the notebook. Thomas looked at Jack. Jack nodded. Thomas pushed the notebook toward her. She opened it and began reading. The room was quiet for a moment except for the sound of pages turning. Then Emily moved from the doorway to the table and sat down. She picked up her yellow legal pad and looked at Thomas Reyes across the table. "Your brother," she said quietly. "He was 25 when this happened." 24, Thomas said. "Just turned." "My mother was 22, Emily said. "She ran from the same situation that night." She held his gaze. "She spent the rest of her life being afraid too." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. The rigid set of it eased slightly, not into softness, but into recognition. "She kept records," he said. 25 years of them, Emily said. "Hidden in a bank box, waiting for the right moment." Thomas nodded slowly. "Danny would have liked her," he said. The moment was interrupted by Carl appearing in the doorway from the hallway. His expression was calm, but his eyes were not. "Jack," he said, "we've got a problem." Jack was out of his chair before Carl finished the sentence. "What? My neighbor just texted me," Carl said. "Man came to her door 20 minutes ago, asking if she knew anyone named Emily Carter. Said he was from a property management company." He paused. "She told him no, but she saw him take pictures of the houses on either side of her before he left." Jack's jaw tightened. "They're triangulating," Jack said. "They're working outward from Delmar Street through known associates." "I'm not a known associate," Carl said. "Not publicly." "Someone told them," Jack said. The room went very quiet. Because that was the thing Denny had said, and Marcus had confirmed it, and Jack had known since this morning, but hadn't fully confronted yet. Hale had someone in Millbrook, someone close enough to know how things worked, who moved in whose circles, how to trace a thread from point A to point B. Someone who knew Jack well enough to know where he might take a person he was protecting. Emily was looking at him from the table. "What do we do?" she asked. Jack looked at Karen. "How fast can you file?" he said. "By tomorrow afternoon if I work through the night," she said without hesitation. "Do it," Jack said. He looked at Marcus's number in his phone. He looked at the room, Thomas Reyes with his brother's notebook, Karen Feld with a laptop and 25 years of evidence, Emily Carter with her legal pad and her mother's handwriting, in the sheer stubborn force of someone who has been waiting their whole life for the moment when things finally tipped toward justice. He sent Marcus one text. It was time to stop being reactive. He typed, "Bring everyone, tonight." And then he put the phone in his pocket and looked at the people in the room and said, "Here's what we're going to do." He talked for 6 minutes without stopping. Nobody interrupted. When he finished, the room was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Thomas Reyes said, "Let's go." And Karen Feld opened her laptop and Emily Carter picked up her pen. And somewhere across Millbrook, Ohio, Victor Hale was sitting in a house on the east side waiting for Ray Cortland to call him back with a location. He didn't know yet that the location didn't matter anymore because the truth was no longer hiding. It was moving, and it was moving fast. By 9 o'clock that night, there were 11 motorcycles parked along the street outside Carl's house. Nobody on the block said a word about it. That was the thing about the club's presence in a neighborhood. It didn't require explanation and it didn't invite conversation. People looked noted and went back inside. The kind of quiet that settled around 11 Harleys on a residential street was a particular kind of quiet that had its own gravity. Marcus had come himself, which Jack hadn't expected, but it wasn't surprised by. Marcus didn't usually show up for things that weren't important, and when he decided something was important, he showed up completely. He walked into Carl's living room, took in the full picture, Karen at the table with the laptop, Thomas Reyes with his brother's notebook, Emily with her legal pad, the ledger and the wooden box, and 25 years of evidence spread across the surface, and he stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "Laura Carter." He said it quietly, almost to himself. Emily looked up. "You knew her," she said. Not a question. "Not well," Marcus said. He pulled a chair out and sat down. "I knew of her the same way she knew of us. Small town overlapping circles. I knew she'd been connected to something around the time of the theft, and I knew she'd disappeared from that world entirely afterward." He paused. "I always wondered if she was all right." "She wasn't," Emily said. "Not really. Not for a long time." Marcus nodded slowly. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the wooden box. Something moved through his expression that Jack recognized as the particular weight of a man confronting the distance between what he'd suspected and what he'd allowed himself to believe. I should have pushed harder, Marcus said. On the Danny Reyes story, I knew something wasn't sitting right, and I let it go because Hale had the documentation and you were certain. He looked at Jack. I let you be certain when I should have made you less certain. You didn't know, Jack said. I had a feeling, Marcus said. That's usually enough of a reason to say something. The room held that for a moment. Then Karen looked up from the laptop. I need everyone who isn't directly involved in preparing this filing to clear this table, she said. I need Emily and I need quiet. People redistributed. Jack took Marcus and Pete Dolan and two others. Ray Stokes and Connor Mills, both longtime members with specific skills in the area of information gathering and physical security, to the kitchen, where Carl had produced coffee in a kind of practical calm that Jack appreciated more than he could say. He laid out the plan. It had three components, and they had to work in sequence. Karen needed to complete the filing package by the following afternoon and get it submitted to the state attorney general's office. That was the legal track. Simultaneously, someone needed to get the information about the development project's financial irregularities to at least two members of the city council before the zoning hearing, not as a formal filing, but as a factual briefing that would give them grounds to postpone the hearing pending investigation. That was the political track. And the third component, the one that was the most immediate and most physical, was making sure that Hale and Cortland did not get to Emily the ledger or the flash drive before the first two tracks were complete. The legal and political tracks are Karen's operation, Jack said. Emily's going to help her. Thomas Reyes stays with them as a witness. The rest of us handle security. Cortland had someone near this block tonight, Marcus said. That means they've got a thread to this location. We probably have until morning before they make a move, but I wouldn't count on that. We're not staying here past midnight, Jack said. We move Emily and Karen to Pete's place on the north side. It's registered to Pete's business entity, not his personal name. That buys us another day at minimum. And the partner, Ray Stokes said. Hale's local contact. We still don't know who that is. We're going to know tonight, Jack said. He said it with a confidence he was partly performing for the room, because the performance of confidence in a room full of people who are keyed up and ready to act is its own kind of leadership tool. But he was also partly genuine because the shape of the answer had been forming in his mind since Denny told him about the partner, and he'd been moving pieces around in his head all day. And there was a direction the logic kept going that he'd been resisting for the last several hours because it was uncomfortable. He stopped resisting it. He went back to the living room. Emily, he said, the man who came to your building 6 weeks ago, Ray Cortland, you described him as mid-40s, professionally dressed, very calm. Did he ask specifically about you by name? Emily looked up from where she was working beside Karen. He asked how long I'd been a tenant. He knew my name because of the buzzer panel. But he didn't say anything to indicate he knew who you were beyond that. No, Emily said, then she paused. Actually, he asked one specific question. He asked whether I'd inherited the apartment from a family member or found it on my own. She frowned. I thought it was an odd question for a property assessment. I said I found it myself. Another pause. He wrote something down when I said that. Jack was very still. He was checking whether you knew about your mother's connection to the apartment, Jack said. Emily stared at him. But I didn't move to this apartment because of my mother. I moved here because it was cheap and available. Did your mother ever live on Delmar Street? Jack said. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. I don't know, she said slowly. She moved around a lot before I was born. She never talked about specific addresses. Jack pulled out his phone and called Marcus back in from the kitchen. I need to know if Laura Carter ever had an address on Delmar Street, he said. Can you run that down, Marcus, whose ability to find information through a network of people who'd been in Millbrook for decades was second to none, said, give me 30 minutes. It took 22. Marcus came back into the room with his phone in his hand and an expression that told Jack the answer before he said a word. Laura Carter rented a room on Delmar Street from 1996 to 99, Marcus said. Not in that building, the one that used to be on that lot before it was torn down and rebuilt in 2001. He paused. The new building was put up by a development company. You want to know which development company? Nobody needed to ask. The same holding group, Jack said. The same one, Marcus confirmed. Which means Hale's group built the building that Emily is now living in. Built it on the site where Laura Carter used to live. The room was quiet. Emily set her pen down. He kept track of the address, she said quietly. After my mother ran, he knew where she'd been living, and when she died and her daughter showed up in the same area, he saw it as a risk, Jack said. He couldn't tell if it was coincidence or if you were there deliberately. That's why he sent Cortland to evaluate, to find out if you were Laura Carter's daughter living in your mother's old neighborhood by accident, or if you were there because you knew something. I was there by accident, Emily said. I know, Jack said, but he didn't. He paused. And here's the part that tells me something about his local contact. For Hale to know that Emily Carter was Laura Carter's daughter, for him to make that connection, someone had to tell him. Because Emily's last name is Carter, her mother's last name was Carter, but Hale hasn't been in Millbrook's active social landscape for years. I wouldn't just know by coincidence that the young woman in apartment 2F was the daughter of a woman he'd crossed paths with 25 years ago. Someone told him who she was, Marcus said. Someone who knew Laura Carter, Jack said. Someone who knew both of them. Someone who saw Emily move to Delmar Street and made the connection and passed it to Hale. The kitchen had gone completely silent. Everyone in the house was either in the living room or standing in the kitchen doorway listening. Someone who knew Laura Carter well enough to recognize her daughter, Emily said. Her voice was very controlled. In a town my mother lived in for 3 years before I was born. Jack nodded. Who knew your mother, he said. Anyone she mentioned. Anyone connected to Millbrook from that period of her life. Emily thought. She didn't talk about Millbrook often. She said it was a difficult time. A pause. There was one name, a woman she'd known. She mentioned her maybe twice in my whole childhood, always briefly, always with something complicated in her voice. She said this woman had been kind to her when things were hard, and then later had chosen a different kind of life. Emily frowned. She said her name was Patricia. The name landed in the room, and Jack felt something cold move through him. Because the bank, Millbrook Federal Savings, and the woman at the service desk who had processed Emily's access to Box 114 without hesitation, who had looked at the box number and the key with an expression that was entirely professional and entirely unrevealing. Patricia. Describe her, Jack said, his voice very even. Emily described the woman from the bank, 53 or so, careful, precise, an expression that gave away nothing. Jack looked at Marcus. Marcus's jaw was set. Patricia Hale, Marcus said, Victor Hale's sister-in-law. She took back her maiden name after a divorce 12 years ago. He paused. She's been at Millbrook Federal for 20 years. The silence that followed was absolute. And then Emily said very quietly, she saw the box number. She saw the key. She called him. The moment we walked in, Jack said, before we even sat down to do the paperwork. Which means he's known what we have since this morning, Emily said. Yes, Jack said. And he's had all day to respond to it, she said. Yes, Jack said. Emily looked at the ledger. She looked at Karen's laptop. She looked at Jack with an expression that had moved past fear into something harder and more purposeful. Then we don't have until morning, she said. No, Jack said. We don't. He turned to the room. Karen, he said, what do you need to complete the filing tonight? Karen didn't look up from the screen. 2 more hours on the documentation, then another hour to format and submit. She paused. And a reliable internet connection, which Carl's appears to be. You have 3 hours, Jack said. Emily stays with you. Thomas stays with both of you. Ray and Connor are on this house. He looked at Marcus. I need to know where Hale is right now. I can find that out, Marcus said. Then find it out, Jack said, because I'm going to talk to him. Marcus stopped. Jack, he said. Not the way you're thinking, Jack said. We're not going to solve this with a confrontation in a parking lot. That's not what this is. He looked at Marcus steadily. I'm going to talk to him because someone needs to make him understand that the time for quiet solutions has passed. That what he does in the next 3 hours determines whether this ends with a state investigation or something considerably more public. You're going to give him the opportunity to walk away, Marcus said. I'm going to give him the opportunity to stop making things worse, Jack said. There's a difference. He won't take it, Marcus said. Probably not, Jack said, but his reaction will tell us exactly how much he knows and how desperate he is. And that tells us how much danger Emily's in tonight. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. It took him 14 minutes to locate Hale. Hale was at a property on the east side, the same location Marcus had identified earlier as Cortland's base of operations, which meant Hale wasn't sitting at home managing this from a distance. He was in the field. He was close. That was information. Jack went with Marcus and Pete Dolan. 3 people. No visible aggression, no performance of force. Just 3 men in leather cuts driving to an address on the east side of Millbrook at 10:30 at night, which in this town and in this context said everything that needed to be said about the seriousness of the conversation. The property was a commercial building that had been converted to mixed use, some storage, some office space, the kind of building that served people who needed to operate without a storefront. There were 2 vehicles out front, one of which Jack recognized from Marcus's earlier description as Cortland's. Jack got off his bike. He walked to the front door and knocked. 3 times. Steady. A long pause. Then the door opened and Ray Cortland was standing there. I was exactly what Emily had described. Mid-40s, professionally composed, the kind of man whose face was trained not to show what he was thinking. He looked at Jack. He looked at Marcus and Pete behind Jack. He looked at the cuts. "Mr. Walker," he said, like he'd known exactly who was going to be at the door. "I'd like to speak with Victor Hale," Jack said. "Mr. Hale isn't." "Tell him Jack Walker is at the door," Jack said. "Tell him I drove over here instead of letting the state attorney general's office handle the introduction. Tell him I thought that courtesy deserved the same in return." Cortland held gaze for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and went inside without another word. 30 seconds of silence. Then another man appeared. Jack had never met Victor Hale in person. He'd seen photographs, old ones from 25 years ago, when Hale had been peripheral enough to the situation that Jack hadn't focused on him as a person, just as a name attached to documentation. In those photographs, Hale had been a forgettable-looking man. In person at 60-something years old, he was the same medium height, silver-haired, the kind of man who cultivated insignificance as a professional tool. I was dressed like someone who worked in an office. He looked like he belonged in a city council meeting or a business lunch, not in a converted commercial building at 10:30 at night. He looked at Jack with an expression that was carefully assembled into something neutral. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice was even, measured, the voice of someone who had rehearsed staying calm in difficult situations many times. "We need to talk," Jack said. "I don't know what you think." "I know about the ledger," Jack said. "I know about the money. I know about Danny Reyes. I know about the HV investment group, and I know about the development project and the zoning variance that's going to the council hearing in 8 days." He paused. "I know about Patricia at the bank. I know she called you this morning." Another pause shorter. "I know everything, Victor." Hale was very still. The neutrality of his expression didn't collapse. It was too practiced for that. But something underneath it shifted the way the ground shifts before anything visible happens on the surface. "Whatever you think you have," Hale said carefully, "is historical. The statutes of limitation on money laundering in Ohio are generous," Jack said. "And what we have isn't historical. The money is in the project right now. The fraud is in the zoning application right now. That's not historical, that's ongoing." He held Hale's gaze. "A very good lawyer is filing the documentation with the state attorney general tonight. Tomorrow morning, before your office opens, the relevant city council members will have a full briefing on the financial structure of the Millbrook Commons project." He paused. "I came here to tell you that personally, because 25 years ago you used my name and my club to cover what you did, and that means you owe me the respect of a direct conversation." Hale said nothing. "Danny Reyes ran for 15 years because of you," Jack said. His voice was still even, but the evenness had a different quality. Now it was the evenness of something held tightly, controlled, precisely. "He died afraid. He died believing people who should have known better thought he was a thief." He paused. "Laura Carter spent 25 years carrying the truth about what happened and was too afraid to say it out loud. She died carrying it." He paused again. "Her daughter has been living in a building you own, being watched by your people because you couldn't stand the possibility that she might know something." He let that land. "Those are the consequences of what you did. Not the money, not the charges. Those people, their lives." Hale's jaw moved. "What do you want?" he said. "I want you to understand that it's over," Jack said. "Not because I say it is, because the documentation is real, the filing is happening, and there is nothing you can do in the next 8 hours that changes that outcome. The only decision you have left is whether you spend the next week trying to make things worse and failing, or whether you accept what's coming. That's not a negotiation, Hale said. No, Jack said. It isn't. A long silence. Cortland had appeared in the hallway behind Hale, and Jack was aware of him the way he was always aware of people standing behind the person he was talking to in situations like this. Marcus and Pete were behind Jack, and they were aware of Cortland too, and everyone in that hallway understood the geometry of it without it needing to be addressed directly. The girl, Hale said finally, Emily Carter, is under the club's protection, Jack said. Any move toward her by you, by Cortland, by anyone connected to either of you, ends any remaining possibility of this resolving quietly. Something moved through Hale's expression. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the recalculation of a man who had built a career on controlling information and was now confronting a situation where the information had moved beyond his control. My sister-in-law, he said, didn't do anything criminal, Jack said. She called you. That's not a crime. Whether you leave her out of this or not is your decision. He paused. Make good decisions. He held Hale's gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his motorcycle. Marcus fell into step beside him. Well, Marcus said quietly as they reached the bikes. He's going to try something, Jack said. He's not going to accept it cleanly. Men like him never do. But now he knows the window is closed, and when a man knows the window is closed, he stops thinking strategically and starts thinking emotionally. He swung his leg over the Harley. Emotional decisions are easier to predict. What's he going to do? Pete asked. He's going to try to get the evidence, Jack said. Not Emily, not directly. The ledger, the drive. He knows we filed. He knows the council briefing is happening. But he's going to tell himself that if he can get the physical evidence back, he can muddy the filing claim. It's fraudulent buy time. It's the only play he has left. Which means he's coming for wherever Emily is, Marcus said. Tonight, Jack said, before the filing is complete. He started the engine. Call Ray, he said. Tell him to move them. Now. Not in 10 minutes. Now. Marcus was already dialing. Jack pulled out of the lot and accelerated. The ride back across Millbrook took 6 minutes at the speed he was going. Marcus and Pete behind him, the engines loud in the quiet streets, the night air cold against his face. Ray answered Marcus on the second ring. The message was relayed. By the time Jack reached Carl's block, the lights inside the house were moving, people moving fast, organized, efficient. Karen had her laptop closed and her briefcase in hand when Jack came through the door. Where are we? Jack said. Filing is 90% complete, Karen said. I need 40 more minutes. You have 30, Jack said. Can you do it from a phone hotspot in a moving vehicle? Karen looked at him. If I have to. You have to, Jack said. Get everything you can't leave behind. We're moving in 2 minutes. He found Emily in the bedroom where she'd been working the legal pad covered in figures, the wooden box beside her. She was already standing when he came in, the box under one arm and her backpack on her shoulder. She'd heard the change in the house's rhythm and had started moving without being told. Hale, she said. Coming tonight, Jack said. You ready? I've been ready since last night, she said. They went out through the back of the house. 3 motorcycles went out the front, Ray Connor and a man named Briggs, who was not Carl, but a different Briggs entirely, which was confusing but not important right now, to create noise and the appearance of a full convoy moving. Jack took Emily in Carl's truck, Karen in the passenger seat with the laptop open on her knees, Thomas Reyes in the back seat with the ledger and a bag between his feet. Pete Dolan followed in his own vehicle. Marcus split off to take a different route and come at the destination from the other side. The destination was 40 minutes north, a property owned by a club member who used it seasonally and who Marcus had called 2 hours earlier to clear it, a place where nobody connected to Hale would know to look. Emily sat in the back seat beside Thomas Reyes and didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. She held the wooden box in her lap with both hands, and Jack, watching in the rearview mirror, could see her looking out the window at the dark Ohio countryside going by. Then she said, "What did he say when you talked to him?" Jack glanced in the mirror. He listened. Did it seem like it was landing? He heard it, Jack said. Whether he accepts it or not is a different question. But you think he's coming tonight anyway? Yes, Jack said. She nodded. She looked back out the window. Okay, she said. Just that one word, quiet and contained with the whole weight of the night behind it. Karen said without looking up from the laptop. Filing submitted. Everyone in the truck was quiet for a moment. When Jack said, 43 seconds ago, Karen said, she closed the laptop partway. The state attorney general's office has a 24-hour intake system for emergency financial crime submissions. It's in the queue. They'll have a duty attorney review it within the hour. She paused. We're on record. Thomas Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and was exactly the sound a man makes when something he has been waiting years for finally happens. Emily put her hand on the box in her lap. Mom, she said very quietly, not really to anyone in the truck, just out loud, just into the dark. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't immediately recognize. He handed the phone back to Thomas without looking away from the road. Read it. Thomas looked at the screen. His voice changed when he read it. It's from Patricia, Thomas said, the woman from the bank. He read it out loud. Tell Emily her mother was the bravest woman I ever knew. I'm sorry it took me this long. The third copy is at the county recorder's office, filed under a business registration in 2015. My brother-in-law doesn't know I kept one. The truck was absolutely silent. Karen slowly reopened the laptop. A third copy filed as a business registration document, she said, and her voice had taken on the particular quality it got when she was already working through the implications. If it was filed correctly, it's a public record. It's been sitting in the county system for 10 years. She looked at Jack in the mirror. He can't suppress a public record. No, Jack said, he can't. He kept driving. Behind them, somewhere in Millbrook, Victor Hale was making the last desperate decisions of a man who had run out of room. And ahead of them, somewhere in the dark Ohio night, was whatever came next. The thing about the truth, Jack thought, is that Laura Carter had been right. It doesn't kill you, but it never stops hurting until it comes out. And tonight, finally, after 25 years, it was out. The only question left was what happened when the man who had spent 25 years burying it realized there was nothing left to bury. Jack pressed the accelerator down and drove toward the answer. The property north of Millbrook was a farmhouse that hadn't been used since August, and it smelled like old wood. Cold air, the particular stillness of a place that had been waiting for people to return to it. Carl's truck pulled in first, then Pete's vehicle, then Marcus from the opposite direction, exactly as planned. Everyone moved inside fast and quiet, the way people move when they know the night isn't finished with them yet. Karen was on her phone before she was fully through the door, standing in the kitchen with her briefcase open on the counter, talking to someone at the state attorney general's office in a voice that was low and rapid and completely in command of every word coming out of her mouth. She'd made the call the moment they pulled in, because the filing being submitted was one thing, and a live human being at the AG's office acknowledging receipt and flagging it for immediate review was another thing entirely. She understood the difference and she was handling it. Thomas Reyes sat at the kitchen table with Danny's notebook open in front of him. He wasn't reading it. He was just sitting with it the way a person sits with something that belongs to someone they've lost present with it, not past it. Emily set the wooden box on the table and sat across from Thomas. She looked at the notebook. He looked at the box. Two people who had never met before yesterday, connected by a single night 25 years ago, that had shaped both their lives without either of them being old enough to know it was happening. Did he ever talk about it? Emily asked. Your brother. Thomas looked up. Once, about 3 years before he died, we were on the phone and he'd had a few beers and he said the worst part wasn't running. The worst part was that he never got to say he didn't do it to the people who needed to hear it. He paused. He said it was like dying with something stuck in your throat. You know it's there, you can't get it out, and nobody can see it. Emily was quiet for a moment. My mother used to say she had a stone in her chest that she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like not to have it. Thomas nodded slowly. Same stone, he said. Emily put her hand flat on the wooden box. We're going to get it out, she said, for both of them. Thomas looked at her, and for the first time since he'd walked into Carl's living room with Danny's notebook and a lifetime of grief under his arm, something in his face eased. Jack was at the window. He'd been at the window since they arrived, watching the long, dark driveway that led from the county road to the farmhouse. Marcus was beside him, both of them reading the dark in the way that men who've spent decades paying attention to their surroundings learned to read it, not looking for anything specific, just staying open to what was there. How long before Hale knows we're not at Carl's, Jack said. If Cortland had eyes on the house maybe 20 minutes after we left, Marcus said. That was an hour ago, so he knows. And it takes him how long to figure out we moved north? Depends on how good his information is, Marcus said. He knows the club, he knows the faces, but the property up here is held under a business name that's 3 layers removed from any individual member. If he's working from personal connections and driving records, he's not finding this place tonight. But if he has someone inside the county system, Jack said. Marcus was quiet for one beat. Then it depends on whether that someone is working tonight. Jack's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, but the area code was Columbus. He picked up. Walker. A man's voice, professional, clipped the voice of someone who worked in institutional settings and had learned to be efficient with words. My name is David Carver. I'm the duty attorney at the state AG's office tonight. I've reviewed the emergency filings submitted on your behalf this evening. And, Jack said, and we're opening a formal investigation, Carver said. The documentation is sufficient to establish probable cause on multiple counts, financial fraud, money laundering, and given the development project timeline, we're treating this as an active situation rather than a historical one. A pause. I need you to understand what that means practically. We're issuing a hold on the zoning hearing first thing in the morning. The city council will be notified before 8 a.m. The development project is frozen pending investigation. Another pause. We're also issuing a preservation order on all financial records related to the HV Investment Group and its associated entities. That goes out tonight. Jack let out a slow breath. What about the individual, he said, Victor Hale? That's a question of timeline and evidence, Carver said. The investigation has to develop before we can move on an individual. But I'll say this, what you've submitted is detailed, it's corroborated, and the third copy your attorney flagged in the county recorder's office as a public document is already being pulled. A pause. Mr. Walker, whoever put that there, knew what they were doing. She did, Jack said. She absolutely did. He ended the call and turned to Marcus. It's open, he said. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. The hearing frozen, Jack said. Morning. Marcus exhaled through his nose. 25 years, he said. Yeah, Jack said. I went to the kitchen. He stood in the doorway and looked at Emily and Thomas sitting across from each other at the table, and at Karen at the counter still on the phone, and at Pete leaning against the wall with a coffee cup, and he said, The AG's office opened the investigation. The hearing is on hold. The kitchen went quiet. Karen lowered her phone slowly. Thomas Reyes put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. Emily looked at Jack. Her eyes were very bright, and she was holding herself with the particular stillness of someone who is keeping something in, because if they let it out, they won't be able to stop it. It's done, she said. The legal piece is done, Jack said. Hale still has to face what comes next, but the hiding is over. Emily nodded, once, very slowly. Then she reached into the wooden box and took out the old photograph, the original one, the one that had been in the envelope in Denny's storage room, the one that had started all of this. She set it on the table between herself and Thomas. They both looked at it. A photograph of Jack Walker in his early 30s, caught in a fraction of a second he didn't remember, preserved by a woman who understood its value better than anyone. She was right to keep it, Thomas said quietly. She was right about everything, Emily said. The rest of the night moved in stages. Karen completed her follow-up communications with the AG's office and then sat down and ate half a sandwich and drank a full cup of coffee and said almost nothing for 30 minutes, which Jack recognized as the behavior of someone who had been operating at maximum capacity and was now allowing the pressure to equalize. She'd earned it, whatever happened from here in the legal process. The foundation she'd built in a single night under difficult conditions was the thing that made all of it possible. Pete Dolan made contact with 2 city council members at 11:30 at night, people he knew personally, people with enough history in Millbrook to understand that when Pete Dolan called at 11:30, it was worth picking up. He briefed them factually and without editorial. Both of them said the same thing in different words. They'd be making calls first thing in the morning, and the hearing was not proceeding until they understood what they were looking at. Marcus sat with Thomas Reyes for a long time. Jack didn't listen to that conversation. It wasn't his to hear. And Jack sat with the uncertainty about what Hale was going to do next, because the investigation being opened didn't mean Hale was finished making decisions, and a man whose 25-year project has just been dismantled in a single night is capable of things that a rational assessment of his situation would argue against. At 12:40 in the morning, Ray Stokes sent a text, 2 vehicles at Carl's house, Cortland and 2 others. They went in, found nothing. Left after 12 minutes, Jack read it. Then was anyone hurt? Ray number Carl wasn't there. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for the evidence. Jack put the phone away. So Hale had gone for the physical materials and found an empty house, which meant he knew the filing had happened. Patricia would have told him they'd access the box, and Karen's submission to the AG's office would have triggered notifications to legal counsel for the development project within hours. He knew the documentation was out of his hands. He knew the hearing was going to be stopped. He was operating now in the pure desperation phase, the phase where men who've spent decades being careful stop being careful and start being reactive. That was the most dangerous phase. Jack went to Emily. She was in the small sitting room off the kitchen alone. For the first time in hours, the wooden box on the cushion beside her and the photograph in her hand. She looked up when Jack came in. She didn't put the photograph down. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. He sat across from her. "That night," she said, "the county road, my mother, you really don't remember it?" He was quiet for a moment, honest. "I remember the night," he said. "I remember being on that road. I remember there was chaos, things were happening, people were moving. There was a situation I was trying to manage." He paused. "I don't remember a young woman specifically. I don't remember seeing her run. I don't remember making any kind of decision that involved her." He looked at Emily directly. "I want to be honest with you about that. Your mother built something significant around a moment I didn't know I was having." Emily looked at the photograph. "She didn't need you to know," she said. "That was never the point for her." She turned the photograph over and looked at the name on the back, her mother's handwriting, careful and deliberate. The same handwriting that had filled the ledger and written the letter and annotated the newspaper clipping. She kept this because it reminded her that someone could be in the middle of their own chaos and still accidentally, without knowing, create a space where someone else could survive. She paused. She said that was the most important thing she ever learned. Jack was quiet. "She wasn't keeping a picture of you," Emily said. "She was keeping a picture of a moment. The moment where her life could have gone one way and went another instead." He looked at the photograph in her hand, his own face younger, caught in a fraction of a second that meant nothing to him and everything to a woman he'd never known. "I'm sorry I didn't know," he said. "You didn't need to know then," Emily said. "You needed to know now." "Now?" He held her gaze. "Why now?" he said. "Because now there's something to do with it," she said simply. At 2 in the morning, Marcus came and said, "Hale's moving." Jack was on his feet instantly. He's not coming here," Marcus said. "He's going the other direction." He paused. "He's heading south, toward the state line." "Running." Jack processed that in about 1 second. "He's not going to make it," Marcus said. "The preservation order the AG's office issued tonight includes a travel flag. His lawyer probably doesn't even know yet. It went through too fast. But any attempt to cross state lines with assets tied to the investigation is going to trigger an intercept." He paused. "He doesn't know the AG's office moved that fast." "He thinks he still has a window," Jack said. "He thinks if he gets out of Ohio tonight, he has time to dismantle the corporate structures before the investigation catches up," Marcus said. "He's wrong, but he doesn't know he's wrong." "Let him find out," Jack said. He sat back down. It took 40 minutes. Karen's phone rang at 2:52 in the morning. She listened for 90 seconds, said 3 words, "Thank you, David," and ended the call. She looked at the room. Victor Hale was stopped at the Kentucky border at 2:48 a.m., she said. State police acting on the AG's travel flag. He and Cortland were in a vehicle together. Both are in custody pending formal charges. She paused. Ray Cortland started talking before they finished reading him his rights. Thomas Reyes made a sound. Jack looked at Emily. She was holding the photograph with both hands. She wasn't crying. She was something past crying in the place that's on the other side of it, the place where the grief and the relief and the exhaustion and the vindication all arrive at the same time and cancel each other out into something that doesn't have a word. "Emily," Jack said. She looked up. "It's over," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Is it?" she said, not doubtful, genuinely asking. The question of someone who has lived for so long is something unresolved that resolution feels foreign. The hiding is over, he said. The rest takes time, but the hiding is over. She nodded. She looked back at the photograph. My mother used to say, she said quietly, that she prayed every day for the man in this picture. Not for anything specific, just that he was all right. That whatever his life was, it had good things in it. She paused. I thought that was a strange thing to pray for a stranger. And now, Jack said. She almost smiled. Now I think she understood something I didn't, that the people who change our lives don't always know they're doing it. And sometimes the right thing is just to hope they're okay. Jack was quiet for a moment. She had a good daughter, he said. Emily looked at the photograph one more time. Then she set it gently on top of the wooden box. She had a complicated life and a lot of fear, in a wooden box full of the truth, Emily said. But yeah, a pause. I think she did okay. The morning came in the way mornings do after long nights, not dramatically, not all at once, but in increments. The darkness going from black to gray to the particular pale color that comes just before the sun actually arrives. Birds, the sound of the county road in the distance carrying the first vehicles of the day. Jack was still awake. I was sitting on the front step when Emily came out with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without asking if he wanted it and sat down beside him. Not close, not far. The comfortable distance of 2 people who had been through something significant together and were now on the other side of it. They sat in the silence for a while. The coffee was hot and strong, and Carl, the real Carl who had driven up from Millbrook at 5 in the morning when Marcus called him, had brought food which was currently being worked on enthusiastically in the kitchen by Thomas Reyes and Pete Dolan, and 2 club members who had been awake all night and were apparently fully capable of making eggs regardless. Karen had left at 4:30 with the complete case file heading back to Columbus to be at the AG's office when it opened at 8. She'd shaken Jack's hand at the door and looked at Emily for a moment before saying, "Your mother put this together over 25 years with no legal training, no institutional support, and no certainty that anyone would ever find it. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I would like that on record." Emily had said she'd have liked you. Karen had nodded once and gone. Now Emily held her coffee cup in both hands and looked at the sky getting lighter. "What happens to the building?" she said. "Delmar Street." "The development project is frozen," Jack said. "The building stays as is until the investigation resolves. That could take a year, maybe more. So I can go back." "You can go back," Jack said. "Though we're going to have someone on the block." He paused. "Cortland is in custody, but Hale had other people. We don't know all of them yet." Emily nodded. She'd accepted the reality of that. Without drama, she'd been living with ambient threat long enough that name-specific protection was an improvement, not a burden. "What about Patricia?" she said. Jack had been thinking about Patricia. "She sent that text last night," he said. "She gave us the 3rd copy. In the end, she made a choice." He paused. "Karen is going to talk to the AG's office about her cooperation. I think she'll be okay." Emily looked at him sideways. "You think she should be okay?" "I think she spent a long time living in her brother-in-law's shadow," Jack said. "And I think last night she stepped out of it." He paused. "That's worth something." Emily turned back to the sky. "My mother did a lot of things right," she said. "But the thing she did rightest," she paused, almost smiling at the word, "was keeping that photograph. Because without it, none of this." She gestured at the morning at the farmhouse, at the invisible shape of everything that had happened. "None of it finds the right shape." "She found the right shape," Jack said. "A long time before either of us knew there was one." The sun came up. Not poetically, not dramatically, just the way suns come up the sky went from pale to pink to the first hard edge of gold, and then the light was everywhere at once falling across the county road, and the field beside the farmhouse, and the row of motorcycles parked along the fence, and the 2 people sitting on the front step with their coffee getting cold. Inside, Thomas Reyes was setting plates on the table. Jack could hear him talking to Pete, something low and easy, the tone of someone coming out the other side of something heavy. The specific relief in a man's voice when the weight he's been carrying turns out to have an end, after all. Marcus came to the door behind them. "AG's office just confirmed formal charges," he said. "Filed at 7:58, Hale and Cortland, financial fraud, money laundering, obstruction." He paused. "And Jack, they're looking at the Danny Reyes case, the original theft. Thomas submitted the notebook as evidence this morning. They're going to try to make the historical charges stick too." Jack looked out at the field. Good, he said. Thomas wants to know if he can use your phone to call his mother, Marcus said. She's 81 years old and she's been told her son was a thief for 25 years. Jack stood up. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held it out toward the door without looking back. He heard Marcus take it, heard him go back inside, heard a moment later Thomas Reyes's voice change into the voice people use when they're talking to their mothers. Lower, gentler, the particular tone that lives in a person their whole life, regardless of how old they get. Emily was listening too. 25 years, she said quietly. Yeah, Jack said. She was quiet for a moment. Then you're going to keep doing this, aren't you? Whatever this is, looking out for people who don't have anyone. He looked at her. I don't go looking for it, he said. I know, she said. It finds you, she paused. Like a photograph in a storage room. He almost smiled. Almost. Something like that, he said. She looked at her coffee. I'm going to finish my degree, she said. It wasn't a question, wasn't a declaration for his approval. It was just a statement of fact said out loud for the first time, the way intentions solidify when you say them in front of a witness. Accounting. 2 semesters. I'm going to find a way. The club can... No, she said, firm but not unkind. I'm going to find a way myself. She paused. But I appreciate that you were going to say it. He nodded. Fair enough, he said. 3 weeks later, the Millbrook Commons project was officially dissolved following the collapse of the HV Investment Group's corporate structure under the weight of the state investigation. 4 additional individuals connected to the financial network were named in expanded charges. A federal agency became involved when the money trail crossed state lines, which it had multiple times in ways that Hale's initial Ohio operation had been obscuring for 15 years. Victor Hale's attorney entered preliminary discussions about a plea agreement. Ray Cortland had already agreed to full cooperation. The zoning hearing was never rescheduled. Danny Reyes's name appeared in the formal investigative record as a wrongfully accused individual. It was a small thing, a line in a document. But Thomas Reyes, sitting in a lawyer's office in Columbus reading that line, said it was the loudest thing he'd heard in 25 years. Emily Carter went back to Delmar Street. She painted the door of apartment 2F a color that was somewhere between blue and green because she'd always meant to do it, and now she had a reason to think she'd be there long enough for it to matter. She re-enrolled at the community college for the spring semester. She carried the wooden box with her when she moved things around, not hidden, not locked away, just present the way important things should be present. Chet put the photograph in a new frame. Not glass and plastic from a dollar store, but a real frame dark wood, the kind that was meant to last. She hung it on the wall where she could see it from the table where she studied. Not because it was a picture of Jack Walker, but because it was a picture of a moment. The moment where her mother's life could have ended and didn't. The moment that had led through 25 years of quiet courage and careful record keeping and a wooden box full of truth to everything that followed. Jack came to Millbrook on a Thursday in December, 3 months after the night in the storage room. He didn't announce it. He rode through town, stopped at Denny's shop for 20 minutes, and then drove to Delmar Street. He knocked on the door of 2F. Emily opened it. She looked at him, at the cut, at the silver in his beard, and the steadiness in his eyes. She stepped back to let him in. The apartment was the same size, but it felt different, not larger, but more occupied, more lived in. There were new things on the surfaces that spoke of someone who'd stopped treating the space as temporary. Textbooks on the shelf organized by subject. A second chair at the table, a small plant on the windowsill. And on the wall, in the dark wood frame, the photograph. Jack looked at it for a moment. You hung it, he said. I told you I would, Emily said. He looked at it a moment longer. His own face, 30 years younger, caught in a second he didn't remember. Preserved by a woman he never knew, passed to a daughter who had carried it to exactly the place it was supposed to reach. She was right, he said, your mother. About what specifically, Emily said. She was right about a lot of things. He turned from the photograph and looked at Emily Carter, 24 years old, 2 semesters from an accounting degree, alone in a small apartment on Delmar Street that she'd painted the door of blue-green because she intended to stay. About people, he said. She said one act of kindness could change a life. She built 25 years of her life on believing that. She did, Emily said. She was right, he said, but she left something out. Emily looked at him. What? He looked at the photograph one more time, then back at her. It changes both lives, he said, not just the one. Emily held his gaze for a moment. Then she moved to the kitchen. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." He sat, and the photograph hung on the wall between the window and the door, in the good frame that was meant to last in the apartment where a 24-year-old woman was building something real out of the wreckage of a truth that had been buried too long. Laura Carter had spent 25 years being afraid of a man who didn't remember her. She spent those same 25 years trusting a man who didn't know she existed. She'd kept a photograph not because she was weak, but because she was wise enough to understand that evidence matters, that truth has weight, and that the people who hold it quietly, carefully at great personal cost are the ones who make it possible for justice to eventually arrive. She died before she could see it arrive, but she made sure it would. And in a small apartment on Delmar Street with a blue-green door and a dark wood frame, and the smell of coffee and the sound of a Thursday in December in a town that was slowly waking up to the things it had been allowed to forget, her daughter was living proof that she had been right about everything that mattered. Some people carry the truth for decades so that others can finally put it down. Laura Carter was that kind of person. And the photograph that started everything, the one that should never have existed, the one that found exactly the hands it needed to find, was still hanging on the wall when Jack Walker's coffee was done and he said goodbye and walked out to the Harley and started the engine. He rode south through Millbrook, past Denny's shop, past the bank on the corner, past the building on the east side that used to be Cortland's base of operations and was now sitting empty, a for lease sign in the window. Another chapter of a bad story closed. He rode until the town was behind him and the road opened up and the engine under him was the only sound in the world. He thought about Laura Carter. He thought about what it meant to change a life in a moment so small you didn't know it was happening. I thought about a 24-year-old woman painting her door blue-green because she planned to stay. He thought about a photograph in a dark wood frame on a wall where someone could see it every day and remember that the truth, however long it waits, however much it costs to carry, however many years it spends locked in a wooden box in a bank vault, always finds its way to the light. He opened the throttle and he rode. Because some things don't need a conclusion. They just need to keep moving forward, exactly like the people who made them possible, who never stopped believing that the truth was worth carrying, that kindness was worth remembering, and that even the most feared man on the road could turn out to be exactly the person someone needed him to be, in exactly the moment it mattered without ever knowing he was doing it.